As the title reads, I've officially gained information from sources on whether Ghost of Yotei has sold well or not in its first very crucial week of release. But a few caveats and such before I get there. Firstly, these numbers are digital only, so no physical sales, although I'll get into those after a bit later on too. Secondly, the numbers that I was given are only for all of Europe, United States of America, and Canada combined, which, let's be real, those are the biggest markets for games like a Sony first party game anyway, so this means that the numbers that I was given are still, well, pretty bleak. Okay, with that out of the way, what do you think? 2 million copies? 3? Maybe 5 million copies? The official number for Ghost of Yotei's digital sales for its first week as of this video anyways is 1.1 million copies sold so far. Yep, it's bleak. It's actually not good at all, and I already know me saying this out loud is going to piss off every single defender of this game. But I was given this information directly from people who have all the access and such to this sort of information, so it's verified and it's not looking good, fellas. But I was also given more. Firstly, Yotei in its first week, based on data, has sold 40% more than Tsushima digitally. But this is likely due to the goodwill that Tsushima built as the start of the franchise 5 years ago. But from what I was also told, in most big places in the world for comparison, Tsushima was a pretty even 50-50 split with physical and digital sales. However, for Yotei in Europe, it's looking more like 70% digital, 30% physical these days, which is not surprising considering that most games sold these days are usually via digital sales anyways, let's be honest. And from these people's professional opinions, the general consensus that I was given is that they are looking at Yotei's first week sales as not bad to somewhat disappointed, but they frankly believe that it should have done way better than it has already. In their expert opinions, they told me that Tsushima sold slightly less than Yotei in its first week, but it's not exactly a good sign because Tsushima was an unknown new franchise at the time, so naturally it's expected that when a new franchise has a crazy start like Tsushima did, which, let's look at that data from 5 years ago if you don't mind, as seen here from Sony themselves 5 years ago, Tsushima was the fastest selling new IP in Sony's history at the time with 2.4 million units sold in its first week. Yotei has not sold anywhere near that, unfortunately, for them. It's actually probably about half of that. Again, that 1.1 million units is for digital only, but again, digital is the strongest sell for most games, and the fact that Sony was barely able to break just over 1 million copies sold, and arguably their 3 biggest markets that cover most of the planet is, well, let's be real guys, not good at all. There's a reason why Sucker Punch and Sony have been so quiet lately on Yotei. It's because based on that data, the game is not necessarily a flop, I wouldn't say that yet, but it's also not doing gangbusters or splitting the heavens or anything either. The saving grace for Yotei though is that it was made on the cheaper side, around $60 to $66 million in budget or so, which I know is still a lot of money for you or me, but when it comes to AAA games, that's nothing compared to what they usually cost. Call of Duty titles usually cost around 400 million plus per game to make it if you want other AAA comparisons. Spider-Man 2 was 300 million as well, which is probably a better comparison since it's also Sony. But Yotei has not done Spider-Man numbers or God of War or even Horizon. If any of Sony's franchises that costed more in line with what AAA usually does, and they also only sold about 1.1 million copies in about a week, you would be expecting layoffs and then some, cause let's be real, it's pretty horrible. But from the people I spoke to that shared this information with me originally, they do think that Yotei, in their opinion, costed more because open world games generally cost more to make than any other type of game these days due to the sheer scope of them. But Sucker Punch was very smart at least to reuse assets aplenty, not to mention setting their game back in Japan again, which obviously allowed them to reuse pretty much everything from Tsushima as well. But again, Yotei has sold roughly half or less of that than what Tsushima has in the same time period, despite being a sequel with apparently goodwill and a roaring start that Tsushima placed for them. The easiest layup of all time, but this is how it's gone, I guess. Now, I know people will say it's the right-wing grifters' fault, but let's be real, guys. Not everyone watches YouTube videos on games. Not everyone is as in tune with the culture as the people watching this video right now. So this means that even the most milquetoast vanilla gamers who just buy what they like and know literally nothing about the politics behind them, they also didn't buy the game either, it looks like, which tells me that that players in general are just completely done with either female-led first-party Sony games, which I don't blame them since that's most of them these days, let's be honest, or they're just tired of open-world games, but I think it's the first thing less so than the open-world thing myself. I also think the Charlie Kirk dev firing thing was also a big reason why a lot of people in Europe, America, and Canada also didn't buy the game either. And the added dagger to the heart of the lead actor Erika Ishii's Antifa comment definitely didn't help since that went viral pretty much too. You can go to any post on Yotei from Sony, whether it be Twitter, Facebook, or more, the same things just keep getting said. People are not buying the game just as for Charlie Kirk, and now with us knowing that it's only 1.1 million digital copies in Sony's 3 biggest markets, that's frankly abysmal by comparison. It's Dragon Age Veilguard all over again. Well, maybe a little bit better than Veilguard, but not by much. And both games, by the way, star Erika Ishii, so I'm sensing a pattern here too. However, my sources told me the real battle is usually not the first week, it's actually the second. Since the first week is all the pre-orders and the hype, obviously, so the second week, like when a movie comes out, shows if that product has legs, if you will. I don't think that Ghost of Yotei will flop though, again, simply because of that alleged really low budget. However, Alania Analytics had some more information too, so let's read into what they have to say as well. They do try to swindle the numbers a lot in their post, mind you, but here's their infographic on screen. They say that 1.6 million copies were sold in the first week, which is almost a million less than Tsushima did in its first week as well. But they do try to swindle it by saying that 2 million copies were sold to retailers. Like, what? But that number doesn't actually mean anything because that's to retailers, not the players. Like, every game sells in the millions to retailers physically, like Best Buy or GameStop. That's nothing new. So that's not exactly a metric of success that matters here. So it's curious why they added that number there, if for any other reason that I would guess, than to just put a bigger number on screen so people who don't understand things can then use it as a gotcha, probably. And by the way, if you enjoy the content and want more non-BS reporting on games, consider liking the video, subscribing, leaving a comment. Thank you very much. But we can do some math though too. So digital copies overall were 1.1 million. So that leaves about 500,000 copies sold physically or so, according to Alania. That being said, it also means that what Alania showed that only 25% or so of the actual physical copies that were shipped to retailers actually got bought by consumers, meaning that the vast majority of that 2 million mark is sitting stagnating on the shelves with no one willing to buy the copies of the game, which is actually way worse than I thought originally. But it also says that 77% of the share was digital, which is that 1.1 million number that I gave you guys already. So this correlates exactly with what I was told then and proves it more that yeah, Yotei did not do nearly as well as Tsushima did. However, the game did not flop, maybe, but again, because Sucker Punch was smart on the budget at least. Had they did a Spider-Man level budgeted game, this would be a catastrophic failure for Sucker Punch as a studio. This means they just maybe made back their budget, but their actual sales are lagging far behind that of Tsushima. At the very least, I guess it means that Sucker Punch maybe won't suffer layoffs, maybe anyways, who knows yet, I don't know yet obviously, but it's pretty obvious that Sony is still likely not happy with this results, and Tsushima was explosive out of the gate. And this is, well, not doing nearly that, but again, saying 2 million copies sold to retailers, that's just so disingenuous with Alania. They definitely only put that there to soften the blow, it seems. It's like some food retailer being like, yeah, so what if no one bought our apples? We still sold our apples to the retailers. So what if they're all rotten now? Stop being a bigot. Just because nobody bought our apples doesn't mean they're not good. Like, you can't be serious. Yeah, like movie studios also, I guess, sell their movies in a sense to movie theaters, but if nobody's watching them, then they're not making money, are they? But I wouldn't put it past the usual apologists to use that number to shill it either way, but at least you guys all know, so if they do say that, call them out because they're being, disingenuous. But yeah, they only sold 25% of their physical copies, which is, yikes dude, not good at all. Expect some sales on Yotei pretty quick probably, although it has been confirmed that Yotei sold about 120,000 copies physically in Japan alone, which if that were anywhere else in the world, that would be frankly pretty abysmal, but since that's in Japan, it's actually pretty good, I'll be honest. Because if you didn't know, the Japanese are not very susceptible to buying physical copies of games these days, so Yotei didn't do great in Japan, but again, 120,000 in Japan physically is still decent considering how that nation works when it comes to games. Because Japan is very much so more a mobile game sort of nation, it's why the Switch and such do so well there. because you can obviously take it on the go, and it makes sense that there's rumors that Sony wants to do a Nintendo Switch-like system for the PS6, but we'll see what happens there eventually, but who knows. But according to people reacting to Alania's numbers, they're claiming that Alania is wrong all the time, but I don't know about that myself. I find their numbers are usually pretty good or decent at least. They may, muck things up here or there, but regardless, that 1.6 million total for your sequel game is not very good, but it is what it is. This then brings me to what the rest of the industry is also saying, which just strengthens what I was already told. This comes from that Park Place as it reads here. Rumor, Ghost of Yotei ads quickly scaled back by Sony Japan due to collapsing sales. As that Park Place says here as well, according to the source, the decision comes in response to disappointing sales trends and a desire not to lose money on a game that has a declining sales trajectory. Yeah, sadly, I think we're going to be seeing a lot of this in the coming future. The reality is that Ghost of Yotei has not done gangbusters the way that Sony clearly intended it to do. They genuinely thought that they had another Tsushima on their hands, but Tsushima sold around 1 million copies more than Yotei did in the same time frame, while also being an unknown new franchise to boot, and by the way, it was during COVID. But anyway, these numbers are frankly embarrassing for Sucker Punch and Sony, if I'm being honest, because remember, Yotei is meant to be their big fall game, when if you compare it to anything else that is coming out this fall, Yotei is frankly being decimated. Maybe not a fair comparison, I know, but Battlefield 6 is going to shoot past Yotei's sale numbers in probably under 30 minutes of release. But that's what you get when your game is, actually wanted by players. Yotei is just going to be another middling Sony game that will likely be 40% if not more off by this fall season probably, and inevitably in a year or two it'll probably also come to PS Plus, maybe not as a title that you can redeem forever, I doubt they'll do that, but they will likely add it to the service as a title that exists there and said to be played for a bit before pulling it off of there to, incentivize sales maybe. They literally do the same thing with Last of Us Part 2 Remastered and Part 1 that just came to PS Plus, by the way, after less than a year of that game being released too. But anyways, circling back to that Park Place, they did have more to say. One part of their source told them that the situation surrounding Ghost of Yotei has surprised Sony PlayStation internally, but maybe for all of the wrong reasons. And that they, as seen here, Sony described the situation as unexpectedly soft given the PlayStation exclusive title's heavy pre-launch promotion and supposed strong start. Yeah, well, that was before people realized Atsu was being played by a literal raging activist and that your developers were celebrating the death of an innocent man. That does tend to have lasting effects on your studio and games, but this should come expected and be yet another hard lesson for Sony and their PlayStation brand. That they are ruining their own success by giving into clearly declining Western sensibilities from their first-party studios. The Twitch viewership numbers are in the dumps already. The highest watch stream of Ghost of Yotei was actually just Asmongold, just dunking on the game, which is probably not what you want, but hey, it is what it is. But this cutting of funds, allegedly anyways, for the marketing is usually a foolproof way of confirming that your game is not selling as well as you intended, and it's likely much better to just cease marketing the game in order to, not waste your money for literally no reason. If you want a game that does well and has legs, as a great example, that would be, say, Spider-Man 2018 that came out on the PS4. That game had ads for at least a month and then some on many websites and even TV commercials, which translated into sales aplenty for that game. It did over like 20 million copies sold. But just go look at any gaming website right now. Many of them have already pulled their ads surrounding their websites for Yotei as well, and that's not a good sign, guys. It means that despite pushing Yotei in players' faces 24/7, it's clearly not working. Well, you gotta stop hiring insane activist weirdos as your lead characters and making the gigabrain move of putting their faces in the games too. Yeah, stop doing that. Because at that point, it's pretty much impossible to escape the presence of someone who is so clearly radically aligned with things like Antifa of all things. It's not a good look, because if they say anything stupid or polarizing in the future, at the very least, you can hope people still buy your game and maybe just change the dub to another language or something in order to save face and still make sales at least. But with how Ghost of Yotei set up, it's literally impossible to avoid Eric Ishii. So no thanks, I'm not buying it even when it's on sale. I'm good. I'm just not interested whatsoever. Plus, when this video drops, Battlefield 6 will be out in the open anyway, so people will probably forget about Yotei real quick here, to be honest. And honestly, I don't blame them. I also want to poke at the gaming journalist who pushed a random tweet of some random user who made up a narrative that Yotei sold 1.3 million units in its first 24 hours. It was this tweet on screen here from Millie A, who's a literal nobody that no one knows, yet they just use this as gasoline, I guess, to fire up the propaganda machine regardless. No, Yotei did not sell 1.3 million copies in 24 hours. It barely sold over 1 million units digitally in Sony's 3 biggest markets on this planet in over 1 week of sales sales in actuality. Of course, to add more salt to the wound, if Yotei was doing incredibly well, you would have seen Sony, or at least Sucker Punch, confirm it, but they haven't. Look at that first thing that I showed you guys in this video, where Sony confirmed that Tsushima broke records day one. That's the sign of a healthy game. Companies do not report when their games don't sell well. What was another game made by a studio that even over a week that also studio said nothing about its sales too? What was that game again? Oh right, that was BioWare with Dragon Age Veilguard. That game sold a measly 1.5 million copies when it was all said and done. While the previous Dragon Age game, being Inquisition, managed to hit over 11 million units sold and won Game of the Year literally everywhere. But the difference was stark when comparing how a franchise can perform and function when it's not riddled with ideology versus when it is. And sadly, I don't think these developers and writers and whoever are going to be learning the right lessons here anyways. It's just going to be you're the problem and not them, even though you didn't make Veilguard or Yotei, but sorry, but we're not the target audience, I guess. Alright, I forgot, but I also got confirmation that if you compare Yotei to Spider-Man 2 within that same time frame, I was given this information too, by the way, which also is a fair comparison since they both launched on PlayStation 5 only at the time. But anyway, my sources told me that Spider-Man 2 sold roughly 50% or more than Yotei did digitally, specifically in Europe, the Middle East, and Africa, but no words on North America yet, but honestly, it probably did better too, because it's Spider-Man, for God's sakes. It probably sold way better than Yotei did in North America anyways, but the word of mouth definitely did ruin Spider-Man 2's long-term sales, because the game's story and characters were, well, you all know. I don't need to repeat it, but anyways. And you also know it's not going well when even Screen Rant has articles like this one titled, Ghost of Yotei's success is real, but its record sales might be fake. Man, the gaming press is reaching so hard with this, you'd think they're pulling their arms out of their sockets, dude. The defense being placed for Yotei is just kind of weird, and it's extra wild that it just isn't working. And also that Park Place had another rumor, but it's fun to speculate a bit, and it's kind of interesting. So here's what that rumor said, which reads, Sony could ditch Western studios, may shift to Japanese devs and traditional stories for exclusives if Ghost of Yotei and Intergalactic the Heretic Prophet fail. Here's what they said. A source close to Sony tells that Park Place that internal discussions in Japan suggest a major strategic reset could be coming for PlayStation's exclusive lineup. According to our source, both Ghost of Yotei from Sucker Punch and Intergalactic from Naughty Dog are being viewed as last chances for Western developers to land major exclusives under the Sony company's current direction. They continue with this. Another rumor I am also hearing is that Naughty Dog's Intergalactic and Ghost of Yotei are the last chance for these Western developers. If they fail, after that, Sony is going full focus on Japanese developers and instead go back to traditional stories and characters. They're citing China winning on the gaming market with Genshin Impact, Black Myth Wukong, and Wuthering Waves as a reason to change. This frankly would not surprise me at all. Wuchang Fallen Feathers broke over 100,000 players on Steam alone at release, despite being made by a smaller Chinese-based game studio. Let's not forget about Black Myth Wukong, which did Elden Ring numbers and hit over 1 million players alone concurrently on Steam when that released, which was absolutely insane. And then you have the dominance of games like Genshin Impact, Wuthering Waves, and more, which are all not made in the West, and based on their profits and player numbers, yeah, we can tell that they aren't. And Sony, if they were smart and want to actually make money, they gotta look at the PlayStation 5 era as a cautionary tale. It has been an era for PlayStation where frankly almost all of their exclusives have done worse compared to the PS4 generation. And the underlying issue to all of these games has been the push for ideology across the board, as well as ballooning budgets, let's be honest. And if Sony wants to compete specifically with places like Nintendo, which is their biggest competitor now, they do need to refocus themselves. Think about it. Most of Nintendo's first-party games are still unapologetically Japanese and made by Japanese developers and have way smaller budgets compared to Sony's games. Sure, you can criticize Nintendo's price increases or how they view their patents as weapons to crush smaller devs, absolutely. However, if anything, it's very clear that Nintendo's first-party games, they still sell. Mario Kart World sold like crazy. Donkey Kong Bonanza sold like wild too. Whatever the new Mario game is for Switch 2, that's going to sell like crazy as well. And Pokemon games, no matter how little effort gets put into them, they still sell like insane amounts still. And what do they all have in common? Oh, right, they're all made by Japanese devs. Go figure. If Sony wants their games to be amazing and sell like Nintendo's do, they need to adopt the same mindset, which is to remove the agenda and focus on what matters and lower those budgets a bit. Maybe take a little thing out of Ghost of Yotei there. Lower those budgets. It works, man. It works. Although Nintendo is still, slightly pushing agenda too. As we know, DI is still rampant in, say, Pokemon, but Pokemon, regardless, will still sell like hotcakes. In case you don't know, Pokemon is the single biggest IP in the world. It eclipses everything around it by tens of billions of dollars in profit. Not even the Marvel Cinematic Universe can't even hold a candle in profitability to Pokemon. Go look it up, I'm not even kidding. But Sony has lost a lot of money and credibility pushing slop made by their Western devs who care more about this messaging than the people who buy their games. And whether you're a multi-billion-dollar company, the best bet is to still pivot and go back to what you know. Go back to what made the PS4 and the PS2 especially so profitable. There's a reason why the PS2 is still the highest selling console of all time. Sure, it's because it could play DVDs, but also because the games were Japanese made by a large margin, and that's why they sold. There was no agenda. It was just fun games that were amazing, instead of having clips like this from Ghost of Yotei, where your woman yells and all the men are cowering in fear. Please watch this.
Spammy spirit, please! Don't hurt me! Spammy spirit! Don't kill me! No! No!
Look, I hope Sony realizes this before Nintendo gets too much of a lead on them, because now with Xbox pretty much out of the race at this point, Sony has to worry about Nintendo mostly and how meteoric their success is all the time, and Ghost of Yotei is clearly not what players want at all. 1.1 million copies in a week is abysmal for a first-party game, regardless of how much it costs. Sure, it may not be a flop per se, but it's not going to exactly make you the millions either once it's all said and done. Sony needs to pivot, they need to focus, and they need to realize the reason why people buy their stuff and support them is because they are Japanese first, or at least used to be. And if they don't do that, they will run into another abysmal financial setting, so hopefully they do, but time will tell. But that's enough for one video. What do you think? Did you buy Yotei? Will you buy it? Will you be buying that intergalactic game either? Let me know in the comments below. As always, thanks for watching. Subscribe. Always dig deeper, guys. Don't listen to the propaganda. Thank you. And I already know this video will piss off a lot of people, but whatever. It's out in the open now. Thank you. See you next time.